Right, so what are the challenges for external surveys? Let's start with that. So ambiguous data definitions. You know, I'm asked to submit the data and they want to know what my retention rate is, but it's not well defined, and there's 1,000 ways I could define that. There's possibly there's no transparency on how previous data has been submitted. So you know, you're brand new at the institution and you're being asked to submit iPads and you don't have any sort of information about how that was done before. You're making it up again, right? Difficulty managing the submission deadlines and the process. So some of these things take quite a bit of time to submit to, and you have to sort of do an internal, like, you know, design it, pull the data, do an internal review, you submit it to the agency, and it gets kicked back for, you know, whatever reason. You have to resubmit. You know, manage that whole sort of set of milestones and deadlines in the process. There's changes often if it's a recurring sort of survey that you have to submit, or data file they have to submit, that changes from year to year, and understanding what those changes are and how to update your process. You may have a non-repeatable process, so you may, every time you do this year to year, that you're sort of starting from scratch because you either, you know, don't have access to what was done before, or you're struggling to make something that is repeatable. You know, there's the common problem of you do it all on a spreadsheet, but it's not something that you can necessarily, you know, repopulate. Another issue that's big is no audit trail. So you've submitted something, there's a problem, or something comes back to that, and can you go back and say, like, how did we do this? What happened? You know, really get some transparency into how that works. That corresponds to the second bullet there. No approval process, right? So it might be going straight from the person writing the report to just getting submitted to that external agency or whatever it is, and that can have really major impacts. You know, the one example that I know is I knew someone, I will leave her nameless, who told me several years ago that she started as an institutional research person at an institution. There wasn't any sort of previous data about how process was submitted. She was submitting the common data set data. She ran the files and submitted it, and they dropped 10 points in their rankings because or 10 positions, because she was reporting a lower admissions rate, or whichever the way that goes. And she was actually right, like she was doing it the right way, but of course people were, you know, freaking out, like that happens. But there was no sort of approval process. There was no one going through and checking that, you know, and they did it the year after, that's for sure, but they, you know, and then ultimately they were able to get their numbers back up. But those types of things are really important to have some sort of approval for both the design and the data. And then lastly, it's a time thing. Like these external surveys take an enormous amount of time to manage and to figure out, and resources to do. And they're only growing every year. I think I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and you know, there was about 6 different presentations from nonprofit organizations that had designed new survey data that they were collecting to help, you know, benchmark and rate retention, right? And you know, no one was really thinking about how hard it was for people to submit that data. All right, so I'm sure you probably can think of other challenges as well. So let's talk about challenges for internal surveys. All right, so you know, this may be something where you have it, you know, it's a very simple, straightforward process, but there are things that really matter that you're trying to do to really measure things, and the accuracy is super important. So there may be disagreement on the survey questions and the approach or the rubric or whatever, like how are you setting this up, and what's the process to get that approval outside of just, you know, getting in a room and knocking it out. There's sometimes a difficulty to trace back information all the way from some report all the way back to sort of the questions, right, to understand that the lineage of the past from what questions were asked to what the results are. Again, no approval process. So if you're, you know, if you have disagreement and you don't have any way to get approval, like how do you manage that process, and at least put either, you know, to help make sure that you're getting the right things out there, or frankly to have like a, you know, a CYA for the person submitting the thing that what they're doing is accurate. The data that is, you might have many internal surveys, but some people are using SurveyMonkey, and some people are using, you know, this other tool, and some people are just sending out emails. And you might have your data for your reporting of these surveys and the ways you do analysis and a bunch of different survey systems, as well as some people are doing it in spreadsheets and some people are doing it in SAS and SPSS or whatever. So you've got stuff spread out all over the place. No documentation to repeat the process. If you want to run the survey again next year and no one sort of really wrote down like what the process was and what the selection size and how they chose the people, like that, you can't necessarily get comparisons across years. I will say, as I'm laying these things out, the one people who tend to do this very well are academic institutions, because this follows sort of certain amount of scientific method and statistical methods, which are things that are taught well at schools. So I don't want people in IR or IT or the administration to think that I'm saying that schools don't do this well, but I think this is a challenge to figure out how to do this easily, if nothing else, right? There's often not a lot of information about where the survey data is stored or how it is to be used after it's done. So, people do a survey, what happens to that database and how is it supposed to be used after that? And related to that, there's a lack of clear policies or approval on the privacy of that data or the use of that data, right? So as you start building up this information, can people use it for other things, and what are, how do I very specifically control the anonymity of the data and all those types of things? So those are some of the challenges for internal surveys. Again, I think schools do this well, but it takes work to do it well. I think they're doing it with a lot of paper processes.